Hey there, welcome to a new video which I'm recording, and this is basically um, on the title, the Need to Read, which was written by Paul Graham. If you haven't read any of the work that he's done, he's a very smart guy, founder of Y Combinator, sort of like the mentor to Sam Altman. So a lot of the stuff that he writes about is very philosophical in nature, but also very relevant and apt. It's very succinct, and it sort of hits the nail on the head when it comes to talking about different themes and topics. Um, this is one of his shorter essays, but they are very interesting. Um, I think the time that I got exposed to Paul Graham was probably around my uni days, so that's somewhere around 2015, and ever since then I've been following him, and anything that he writes has always been very inspiring. And this particular piece was interesting as well. So that's what we're going to cover today. Um, if you haven't liked, subscribed, shared, please do because it helps. If you like this video, then please drop a comment or a like at the bottom. All right. Um, let's let's start out. So what he's talking about here is that he says that, he talks about how fiction books often talk about acquiring knowledge in a more interesting way. So he's talking about mysterious tapes. They could probably load in information in your head, something that Neuralink is probably going to try and do in the coming years. But this is also, in a way, what AI is sort of trying to do. You have the models which can summarize a lot of information, and that is essentially what he is talking about here. But then he actually goes on to say that reading about a particular topic, which is doesn't actually teach you about it, it also teaches you how to write. And I think that is really impressive because a lot of the communication that we do as humans, while it is quite verbal, a lot of longer piece of information that you would like to communicate has to be in the written form, right? Of course, you could send an audio note for an hour, but it's much easier for someone to speed read the same text as compared to listening to your voice. Um, so writing will not go away in its entirety. It might reduce, but it will still be one of the most efficient ways in which we as humans will communicate with each other. And then he does go on to say that, that if we replace reading, would anyone need to be good at writing? And I think that that is true, right? If all communication is verbal and we're not essentially even thinking about reading, why would anyone actually write any text? And if no one is writing, that essentially puts us in another spiral of thinking about how are we sort of making sure all the best ideas that humans have had over all the past, millennia of existence that we have been in, how are they sort of captured, right? Munger talks a lot about this. He says that um, I know no smart person who does not read every single day, or some quote to that effect. But essentially, all he says is that work on your mental muscle, get up in the morning. At the end of the day, make sure that you spend your day reading, learning something which makes you a tad bit wiser, and that will be a short mechanism for success. And then I think he then goes on to talk about a good writer. So he says that there is, as far as I know, no substitute for the kind of discovery that essentially comes from uh, writing a good piece. And I think this is something that if you read Jeffrey Archer, highly recommended books include The Prodigal Daughter, Cain and Abel, Fourth Estate, As the Crow Flies. Uh, you know, his prison diaries. Just going down nostalgic here, there's like so many books of his that I've read, and he's a fantastic author, and I actually had the privilege to meet him. But I think one of the things that he also talks about is that he was giving um this speech where he was talking about the release of his new book, which I think was A Prisoner of Birth. And he was talking about how he wanted to write a chapter on a specific topic, and he actually had to spend time reading about three books because the main character in the book that he was writing is an expert on that. So for him to be able to show the expertise of that character, he personally, as the author, had to go and read three books about that topic. And then he said eventually all those three books, which was more than like 600 or 900 pages, read over 3 or 4 days, eventually got summarized into less than a paragraph. But that paragraph in itself had so much impact because it gives so much more depth to the character, which a lot of us have sort of lost out on. If you read a lot of the fiction today, essentially it's more um, dialogue whereby two characters are talking all the time, and it's less about books written in the third, from the third perspective or the author's perspective, where he's describing a lot of the events, forcing you to imagine. It's a lot about first person narratives where um, it's just a dialogue between different people that the protagonist or whoever the narrator is sort of meeting. So I do sort of agree with what Paul Graham is saying here. And then he goes on to say that if you don't need to go too deeply into a problem, you can solve it without writing. If you're thinking about how two pieces of machinery should fit together, writing about it probably won't help much. But if you need to solve a complicated, ill-defined problem, it will almost always help to write about it, which in turn means that someone who's not good at writing will almost always be at a disadvantage in solving such problems. And I think if you also think of this from a perspective of the current AI trends, right? It's essentially all about prompts. Of course, the algorithms will get better. Of course, there will be reinforcement learning. There will be, um, multiple improvements to the models made by the various labs. But at the end of the day, if there is going to be an interface between a human and the machine, and it's text or voice, whatever it is, essentially you need to be able to verbalize or write down what it is that you are thinking about. Structure to your thinking is often very heavily related with how you're able to communicate those ideas on paper. What you verbalize might be just the top, just the river of thoughts that you do have. But then when you're writing something, essentially you are trying to structure. You will see that does every subsequent sentence have a logic flowing through? Are there any fallacies in the arguments that you're making or not? So that's why like having coherent thought process, which is a function of the ability of us humans to write, is going to be very advantageous even in the era of AI. And I think that's something that Sam Altman talks about a lot. And then towards the end, basically, Paul Graham saying that you have to be good at reading and read good things. And then he's obviously talking about not the mechanics, but just the quality of the books that we read, which is also what Naval talks about. He says that instead of reading maybe 100 new books, I would actually go and revisit the top 10 or 30 books that are super interesting to me. Like, and that's something that I think even Tim Ferriss or David Sivers also talks about. I'm not sure, one of the two. And they are essentially talking about how if you pick a book and you're reading through it and you don't find yourself engaged in it and you can't read beyond, let's say, 2 or 3 pages, then immediately drop the book and pick something else up, because that is essentially what is going to help you the most as an individual. And then finally, Paul Graham sort of ends with saying that people who just want information may find other ways to get it, of course, but people who want to have ideas can't afford to. Um, with that, a very short um, video. But if you do feel that, this sort of inspires you to go and pick up something to read, um, or if you found this helpful, or if you didn't know about Paul Graham and you've sort of discovered him as well as the ideas that I shared earlier, then please feel free to like this video, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel so that you can get the latest videos. Until next time, see you around. Thanks so much for watching.